Yes, in fact, the older versions are already available. Sorry, I should have thought about that earlier. Thank you, Matthew. Matthew, now we can't shame you for not recording the audio. Apologies. We better start all over again. No, no. Is that better to hear? Easier to hear? I'll move it up a little bit. The higher it is, the easier. Okay. So when installing PhpStorm or Xdebug, you make sure Xdebug is also in the PHP INI files. I find the quickest way to do that is with PHP grep Xdebug if you're on a Mac or Linux, and then just make sure you see Xdebug stuff come out. That's for me the easiest way to make sure it's up and running. Also, you can just do a PHP file with PHP info and see that spit out. Then you'll know it's turned on. It's important to note, an important concept to understand with Xdebug is it's installed on the server and it's trying to reach out to your IDE. That's the direction of communication that's going on. It's not your eIDE trying to talk to the web server. It's the opposite way around, which at first I was like, wait, are you sure? Derek Rathos told me, like, no, it goes the other way. You got to make sure you understand the concept right. So it's using that debugger protocol. That's why it's configured. You have to configure your web server to talk to your IDE. Here's an example. If you php-i, which is the info, and grep it to Xdebug, it just shows stuff. Support, and it's enabled. If you want to find the slides, by the way, I mentioned that I gave this talk at PHP UK. If you go to Joined In, which is often where slides are posted for conferences, and just look for Mark Niebergall Xdebug, it pops up. I have multiple copies of it, different versions of it. You can pull the most recent one. But you just, with like PhpStorm, there's a little button you click, and it's basically like a little telephone picture, and you just tell it to start listening. Again, it's listening because the connection is coming from the web server to your IDE, and so it tells it to start listening to that port. You can also go run to get into it. PhpStorm has a whole bunch of different Xdebug settings that you can use. One of the easiest, best ones to know about is the break at first line in PHP scripts when you're first trying to get it set up on a project, because sometimes it's just not stopping. And this will always stop in the first line of the first file it hits. That's a big one for getting it up and running, I find. Your debugging port, make sure it's open. Debug port 9000, and accept external connections. The no one is force break at the first line. No path map things are set up. So we'll go into the mapping here in a second. The concept here is that you're pointing out your local files and where they are, how they compare to the web server. I typically run with VMs running with Vagrant, and then so it's usually they're just synced directories or shared directories. I don't know, however you want to say it. And so I just map it and say on the web server this is where it sits. So, for example, the www or the HTML is var www.html on the web server, just so it knows where or how that's mapped together. Then you set up your breakpoint. Line that you know is going to be hit. It has to make sure, it can't be like a comment line, it has to be an actual line. I'm kind of moving quick through this part. This is the little easier part to get through before we go to demos and stuff and talk about the other ways to use it. So this is an example of where we see a breakpoint telling it to stop on that line. You just click on the side, and most of the IDEs are similar, where you just click on on the far left in the column, and it adds a red circle. All of my views have all been like that. Activating on a browser. Each browser has its different plugin you can use. You don't have to use it. I like to use these. It makes a little IDE or a little GUI to be able to interact. Xdebug helper for Firefox and Chrome, Xdebug toggler for Safari. Who develops in Safari? Anybody? Okay, not too surprised. Or Opera. Anyone Opera? Xdebug launcher is one for Opera. This one has the, it's right there, little bug. Usually it's a bug icon. I don't think I've ever seen them not be in the bug icon. There's a whole bunch of them out there, by the way. You don't have to use these ones, but.
I actually have a query. So this is related to desktop browser. How about if we need to debug on the mobile browser? Because we provide a simulator, that's true. But if we need to directly run from mobile.
Yeah, so we'll go into that here after the browser. So we'll go into how to use it with like REST clients or through the terminal or SOAP clients and so on. We'll get into that here in a few minutes. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because that's a huge part. I think a lot of, I used just the browser for a long time and didn't know you could run it other ways. So we'll go into that for sure. A good question. Any other questions? So here's Chrome. It has getting a little bug thing. You just turn it on. You can also just do it through the URL. You can add another get parameter of Xdebug session start equals PhpStorm or whatever you're using. It doesn't have to be PhpStorm. Ideally, it syncs up what's in your PHP to INI. You could have it be my dev or debug this or whatever. It doesn't matter. Post is going to be the same, just another post parameter coming down. Headers is really useful. You add a cookie, the value of Xdebug session equals PhpStorm. You can't see the bookmark lit because most likely you won't use it anyways. Sorry. I use the headers actually quite a bit, and we'll get into why we're here in a little bit. Again, just another example of using it in the URL. It's going to do the same thing. It's going to kick off the debugging session with it in the URL. So you can always add it to the URL. And I've had to do that sometimes when I just can't get it to work with a REST client or something. Then I'll just add to the URL and it picks it up. This is Insomnia. So this is a REST client. Anyone use Insomnia? Okay. No. There's a whole bunch of REST clients out there. This is very typical like the other ones. This is what I like to use. And so in this case, it's using the get parameter, and it's firing off the debugging session. So you can see that's one way to use it with a REST client. You just add it to the URL, as we mentioned. In this case, it's not in the URL, it's in a cookie. So often you go to the headers tab or something. Usually there's like a way to add headers in the REST clients. And then you add the header name of cookie, and the next debug session equals, and then whatever it is. Let's say I use PhpStorm usually because that's what I'm using, the IDE I'm using, but like I said, you can name it whatever you want, as long as it's the same as PHP INI. Here's REST client. Anyone use this one? It's another one, just the same example, adding it to the URL, and it initiates the debugging. Or you can add the header, Xdebug session equals PhpStorm, or whatever you have set up to be. In the drug testing world, for whatever reason, everybody likes to use SOAP. Anyone using SOAP for stuff? I got one up.
I've used it for a personal project once.
Okay, personal project. Oh, that sounds like.
I was hitting weather.gov.
That must have been a really fun project, Kyle.
I had to hit weather.gov. It was a lot of work.
Yeah.
If you want to know how much water your yard at any given time.
Ah, okay.
Landscape watering guide. Hit the weather.gov servers. Yeah.
So what does SOAP stand for? Anybody know? Trick question, because it doesn't stand for anything. It used to stand for Simple Object Access Protocol, but it doesn't anymore. So, I didn't trick you guys. Anyway, so the drug testing world, they love SOAP for whatever reason. And so being able to debug from a SOAP client is very helpful. This one's SOAP UI. Same concept, you just add that to the URL, or you add it to the header, as a cookie to the header on the request. and then your IDE will start up. So this is how you would get it to start when you're not using a browser. So here we've seen how to use it in the browser, from a REST client, from an API client, or SOAP client, and so on. If you're using something like a curl, you can add it to the headers or to the URL as well. So there's different ways you can initiate it. I also often have it running from the IDE or from command line, so terminal. From running from the console, I have it started up there as well. So you can run it from all the different entry points. We went over that already. So when you debug in a session, it's important to note too, once you initiate the session, it's valid for a certain amount of time. So once you get it on there, you don't actually technically have to have it on there. Like if you add the cookie or add it to the URL and so on, it actually keeps it valid. I think it's like 2 hours or something. I can't remember exactly. So you reload the page, and as long as the initial mappings are right, it'll fire off. Let's see if the live demo works. I've had it working earlier today, just didn't. All right. Oh. Okay. And it's working. So here I am in PhpStorm. I can come in here and see the line it's on. I can see the cookie variables there. So that little plugin added a cookie, and that's where I'm able to get it. In this case, the session is Xdebug Eclipse. You can see all the server values. There's concepts of stepping into, stepping over, and stepping into, stepping over, stepping out. Yeah, thank you. So in this case, so here we have step over. It's just going to step over the line. It's going to set some values. Maybe you want to step into that. So it's going to follow that function call. You see, it's going to set the hidden value to the value. Maybe you want to step over that and see what happens next. We can set var dump. We can step into the get some value, and it's going to return some value, in which case is 12.43 or 34. And then we can do whatever we want. So we can also, this is one of my favorite tools. You can, that's probably a little hard to see. You can say, you can interact with it. So maybe you want to set it to 100, right? Oops. You can interact with the with the code. You can it's going to be so here it just printed out the well, you can't see it very well, but so you can run PHP commands in here and start seeing what's going on. You can interact with the code. You can run different things. So hidden, you can change hidden value to be 9, and so now it's 9, right? So you can change, you can run different things as needed through the console. And I found that one to be very helpful, especially when you're trying to debug something. Maybe it's hard to get it set up and get it started, but then being able to interact with the code and get it to do what you want it to do while it's live and running. That's been one of the more eye-opening features of Xdebug for me. When you're done debugging, you just hit the play button, let it finish running. Or if you don't want it to go any further, you can hit the stop button, and it'll basically do an exit or die where it's at to kick back out. So we can, if you want to. So, and then there's a 4-step and just step out. So step out will just, if you're inside of a method and you want to step out a level, it'll jump back out a level. So you're not diving deep. I had a really interesting one recently. I was working with a coworker. If anyone knows Dave Stockton, if you read PHP Architect magazine. He used to write for him like every month, prolifically for years. I was working with Zen Expressive, which is a middleware API framework or tool, and I couldn't get the request to work. I was setting these properties on it. I was calling these methods on it. I was trying to return the request, but it wasn't working. I was like, why is this not working? It's driving me nuts. And so he and I sat down, fired up Xdebug, and we started stepping into the frameworks. Anyone stepped into frameworks with Xdebug before? Nobody's, okay, yeah, you have, okay. It's interesting, right? You start to actually see how the framework works. I actually really enjoy that. It's really fun to see how the frameworks work.
You get yourself turned around really easily.
Yes, you do. Yes. Yeah, so you can start stepping into the frameworks and see how they're working. That's really interesting. If you want to familiarize with the framework and see what's really going on, Xdebug and start stepping into the framework method calls and see what it's doing. It gives a really good idea what's going on. In my case, it ended up being immutability was my problem. The request object was immutable, and I was setting a variable to these method calls, these changeable method calls, and then return the variable. What I needed to do was just return calling all those method calls instead. And that solved the problem. It's like, oh, once I saw that, because once we started watching the variables, and we could see the object being changed, but then when you returned it, it was different. And it's like, oh, okay, it's immutability. So those kind of problems, sometimes you have to get your hands a little dirty and dive into the framework. And I actually think it's really interesting. It's really fun to get into those and see what's really going on. Oops, let me do that one. Okay.
Is your request kept on hold while you're doing debugging, or it times out?
Yes, it times out. Yeah, I've run into that problem a lot. Yeah, so you kind of have to be careful, depending what you're doing, obviously. Like in this case, it didn't matter if it was timing out. But yeah, like if you have an AJAX request, right, and it has a 30-second timeout, and you start debugging, it takes you 5 minutes to get into it, it's going to lock up. Yeah, yeah. So you have to watch that one. Yeah, I run that one all the time. Good question. You got to be careful with where you put your breakpoints too. So it's not just like if you throw a whole bunch up there, it's going to take longer to debug, right? Because you're not being strategic about it. You're just throwing up a bunch of breakpoints. You have to evaluate everyone. Conditional breakpoints, we didn't really step into that one. You can right-click. I should show that. Most IDEs allow you to right-click. Like this one has a question mark on it. And so you can set a condition. So, maybe only var or stop here if hidden value is greater than 12, right? So then it'll just skip by if it's not, it'll only stop if it's greater than 12, in this example. And that one's really helpful, especially like if you're in like something that's iterating, like an iterator or a for each loop or something like that, where you only want to stop if a certain condition's met, because you know the condition is, maybe you're working on a bug and it's only with this certain conditions met. You can add that to your breakpoint, and you don't have to try to step through the loop over and over and over and over and over.
You just right-click on the breakpoint to make it do that?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It is so helpful.
I never known about that.
No, there you go. Yeah, that's a good one. Any other questions about stepping into it? I think we hit all the main. Oh, there's one we didn't do. Watches, so you can set up a watch to watch a specific variable. You can also add a watch for like a method call. You can kind of watch how that method call changes over time. That's another helpful one. You can see all the different breakpoints. Most of the IDEs have a way to look at all the breakpoints, turn them on, turn them off, etc. in the project. You can turn off all the breakpoints. So, yeah.
Is there any way to see the profile information in this ID, or like say,
I don't think.
expense is the function or the cost of the function?
I don't think so. I don't remember. I don't think there is a way to see the profiling. There's another tool for it. I don't remember what it's called. Anyone know what it's called?
I use
Was that?
cache grid.
Cache grid? Okay, yeah. So I don't even. I haven't used it before. I've looked at it and poked around, but I people that used it. I couldn't answer well enough. No, it's not. Yeah, it's not very user friendly. Yes, there's a lot to Xdebug that most people don't use, and I don't. I use a lot of it. Went to that. Conditional breakpoints. Yeah, not too many, not too early, not too late. Now there's the time limit we mentioned about already. Watch out for the time limit.
By that time limit, you mean the one on the web server?
Yeah, the web server listening. So like for example, the project, the drug screening platform I work on, we have a conditional where if a request takes too long, of course it's going to display an error, right? We also have a thing where if the requests take too long, it's going to, or if it locks up the system, basically it's going to kick you back out to the login page, right? Some exception handling. And so if you get debugging for too long, then you get logged out and you have to log back in, which is fine. It's just fun. Yep.
Are you talking about in the PHP IE9 the max input time? Is that the time?
No, it'd be like on the JavaScript, your request timing out. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, good clarification. Yeah. Yeah. In PHP side, yeah, it'll just keep running. It'll let you keep going. Yeah. All right, so we're on the breakpoints already. Step into the code. We went through all those. And again, evaluate expressions. Use the console to run expressions, run commands, and interact with the code. By default, you hide the super global variables. You can add methods to skip lists. So if you want a method to always be skipped, you can add it to a skip list, and it'll just get skipped. Which is helpful for some things that get called all the time. Watch, as I mentioned, you can watch specific, method calls or variables, and just keep an eye on what's going on. That's really helpful for what I mentioned that story when I was trying to figure out an expressive problem. It ended up being immutability I hadn't accounted for. We just had added a watch for that variable as we're stepping through the code, and then we see what's actually going on. The console we talked about already. So again, Xdebug's a much more efficient way to debug than just echoing out. I find the hardest thing I have is remembering to use it. A lot of people forget to use it. They'll get it all set up and then forget to use it. And there are lots of features that are available that we probably don't use, and I don't always remember to use, like the interacting with the console, like conditional breakpoints, like skipping specific methods and so on. And the watches, but it's a really powerful tool for PHP as a developer. I've heard an argument that if you're doing true TDD, you don't need a debugger. We can talk about that afterwards. That's a good debate to have. We could have here if you want, but in short time you won't. But maybe at JCWs we can debate that one, the usefulness of it. Setup issues, again, setup issues. Having setup issues, talk to me afterwards. That's one of the hardest things with Xdebug is just setting it up. Once you get it set up, it's good to go for very long, until you change your environment. Again, the profiling, just be aware it's available. And there's alternative methods, and sometimes the alternative method is a better way. Maybe you do have to do it a different way. For example, maybe you have different environments that you maybe have to interact with, and you don't have Xdebug installed in all the environments, right? So maybe you just have it on dev. You can set it up on external servers and interact with those servers as well, remote step into that code, which is very helpful. But you have to have, obviously, server administration to that server, and different things come up. So there may be reasons why you can't interact with it the way you want to. Don't debug a prod. Just don't. Okay.